We all grew up believing in the same story, the story of the fair game. A world where the rules were clear. If you work hard, if you keep trying, you win. It was the story told in classrooms, in graduation speeches, in every glossy biography of a self-made success. We wanted to believe that effort could outrun luck, that persistence could erase origin, that the game, this game called life, was fair enough to reward those who played honestly. And for a while, it seemed true. We saw people rise. We heard about the child who studied by candlelight and became a doctor, the immigrant who built a company from nothing, the athlete who trained through injury and made it to the Olympics. These stories were more than inspiration. They were proof that fairness existed somewhere. They said, look, the system works if you just play hard enough. Every generation needs a myth like that, because the idea of a fair game gives us meaning. It tells the kid working 2 part-time jobs for tuition that it's worth it. It tells the young coder in a small town that maybe one day Silicon Valley will notice. It tells the single mother juggling bills and night shifts that her effort is not in vain. Belief in fairness is a kind of social oxygen, invisible but essential. But myths are fragile things. They begin to crumble when numbers start to talk louder than stories. Economist Raj Chetty's Opportunity Atlas maps the American dream onto real data. It showed that a child born into the bottom 20% of income has less than an 8% chance of reaching the top 20%. The odds are not the same for every player. The board was tilted long before the game began. Still, society clings to the myth. Magazines call billionaires self-made, even when they started with safety nets, education, connections, capital. In the Forbes 400, more than half of those labeled self-made actually came from affluent families. But the label is convenient. It keeps the game believable. It tells the rest of us, you could do it too, if you tried hard enough. We rarely ask whether the playing field was level, only whether someone crossed the finish line first. Education was supposed to be the great equalizer, the arena of merit. Yet in practice, it mirrors inequality more than it corrects it. Think about college admissions. Standardized tests, extracurriculars, polished essays. A fair game on paper. Until you realize who can afford the coaches, the test prep, the volunteer trips abroad. Low-income students often don't even have time for extracurriculars. They're too busy working, caring for siblings, or commuting long distances to school. Their hours of survival never show up on the resume. But universities don't grade survival, they grade presentation. And so the illusion of merit reproduces itself generation after generation. Still, we keep playing. We post our progress, we chase our metrics, we celebrate our wins. Maybe because admitting the game is rigged feels like giving up on hope itself. If the rules aren't fair, then what's left to believe in? So we tell ourselves, it's not perfect, but it's still a game worth playing. We keep our heads down and run faster because slowing down feels like losing. Yet there's a quiet fatigue spreading, not the kind that comes from effort, but from doubt. A sense that the scoreboard no longer measures what matters. That in this obsession with results, we've started mistaking visibility for value, performance for purpose. People win, yes, but fewer people believe in the win. And once belief fades, even victory starts to taste hollow. Because a game only works when its players trust the rules. When we stop trusting, the rules lose their power. And when fairness becomes negotiable, the game itself begins to break. Maybe the dream was never entirely wrong, just incomplete. Hard work still matters. Talent still matters. But maybe we misunderstood what kind of game we were in. Maybe effort was never a currency. Maybe it was a compass. And somewhere along the way, we stopped following where it pointed. In the next act, we'll step outside the myth and look at the arena itself. At how the invisible architecture of privilege, time, and access quietly decides who gets to play. Because before the game died, it was already unfair. We like to think the world rewards merit, that universities, companies, and markets select the best, the smartest, the hardest working, the most deserving. But when you start looking closer, the game begins to look less like a meritocracy and more like a maze built by those who already found the exit. Let's start with education, the supposed birthplace of fairness. For decades, elite universities have told the world that they admit students through a holistic process, one that values character and potential, not just grades. But when researchers examined the numbers, the myth began to crumble. In 2023, court documents from the Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard case revealed something striking. 43% of white students admitted to Harvard were recruited athletes, children of alumni, donors, or faculty. Legacy applicants, those whose parents graduated from Harvard, had a 5 times higher acceptance rate than non-legacy peers with similar credentials. It wasn't just about talent, it was about inheritance. The so-called game of merit had VIP passes all along. Meanwhile, thousands of capable students never even apply. Not because they lack ambition, but because they've already internalized that the game isn't for them. If you grow up in a neighborhood where no one has ever gone to an Ivy League school, applying can feel less like a step forward and more like trespassing. Opportunity doesn't just require effort, it requires imagination. And poverty has a way of shrinking what we can imagine. Even those who make it into the arena face a subtler hierarchy, the economy of experience. Consider the resume arms race of leadership and initiative. For affluent students, this might mean an unpaid internship in New York, a volunteer trip abroad, or a robotics summer camp that costs thousands. For low-income students, initiative often means working at a grocery store, taking care of siblings, or fixing the family car. But one of these looks good in an essay, the other doesn't. As sociologist Anthony Jack calls it, this is the invisible labor of survival. Work that demands resilience and responsibility, yet earns no recognition in a system that only sees polish. Brookings Institution once calculated the difference. Upper-income families spend over $10,000 a year on extracurriculars, while low-income families spend less than $500. That gap isn't just financial, it's cultural. It defines who gets to be called well-rounded, who gets the vocabulary of confidence, and who learns that success means pretending you never struggled. And then there's the deeper, quieter lottery, the luck of emotional safety. To thrive, children need the freedom to fail, to explore, to be seen. But for many families living paycheck to paycheck, failure isn't an option, it's a threat. A lost job, a broken car, a missed rent payment can collapse everything. So while one student experiments, another obeys. One plays the game to grow, the other plays to survive. This is how the myth sustains itself. The winners of the game point to their success as proof that the system works. The system, in turn, points to their stories as proof that the winners deserve to win. A perfect circle of validation, one that keeps everyone running but almost no one rising. Still, we keep saying the same thing. Work hard and you'll make it. Maybe because it's comforting. Because to admit that outcomes depend on luck, networks, and timing feels like betraying the moral order. It feels unfair that fairness itself might be a privilege. Yet ignoring that truth has consequences. It feeds the quiet resentment simmering beneath our institutions. When effort stops predicting outcome, people don't just lose trust in the system, they stop trying altogether. And when belief disappears, meritocracy doesn't fade politely. It curdles into cynicism. We now live in that moment. In classrooms, offices, and online spaces, you can feel it. An exhaustion not of work, but of meaning. People are no longer sure what deserve means. If wealth can be inherited, fame can be hacked, and success can be staged, then merit becomes a costume anyone can rent. The game still goes on, yes, but it's starting to feel like theater. A few play earnestly, most play strategically, and many watch from the sidelines, unsure whether to cheer or to walk away. Because once you see the strings, it's hard to pretend it's magic. And once you know the game is tilted, it's hard to keep playing by the rules. In the next act, we'll see what happens when that disillusionment becomes the new normal. When results, not fairness, become the only scoreboard that matters. That's the birth of resultism and the slow death of fair play. There was a time when effort had its own dignity, when working hard, even without recognition, meant something. But somewhere between the rise of social media and the collapse of trust in institutions, effort lost its audience. Today, what matters most is not the work itself, but how it looks from a distance. We have entered the age of resultism, the belief that only outcomes define worth. In this new creed, numbers have become moral proof. Followers, revenue, likes, rankings, each digit a silent sermon declaring who deserves admiration. The modern world no longer asks what kind of person you are, but how much you've achieved. And when numbers become the currency of respect, integrity turns into an optional luxury. You can see it everywhere. A startup raises millions before building a real product. An influencer sells a lifestyle more than a life. A politician wins by going viral, not by governing well. What unites them is not truth or talent, but visibility. In a world obsessed with metrics, exposure has replaced excellence. We call it success, but what we really celebrate is spectacle. We cheer for the most followed, not the most faithful, the loudest, not the most honest. And so the logic spreads. Why play by the rules if breaking them brings faster results? Why spend years mastering a craft when you can hack the algorithm in a month? Resultism rewards shortcuts because it cannot see the road, only the finish line. The attention economy didn't invent this mindset, it just industrialized it. Social platforms transformed recognition into a scoreboard visible to everyone. Suddenly, every human interaction became a potential performance. Even kindness had metrics: engagement, virality, reach. We stopped asking whether something was right or good. We started asking whether it worked. The consequences are subtle but corrosive. When results become the sole measure of value, process becomes invisible. And once process disappears, ethics quietly follow. The cheater, the manipulator, the plagiarist, all can thrive, as long as they deliver outcomes. When the result shines bright enough, few dare to look at the shadow behind it. Consider how we treat failure now. Once, failure was a teacher. It meant you tried, learned, persisted. Now it's a stain. Resultism has no patience for unfinished work, for slow growth, for silent integrity. It mistakes speed for intelligence and visibility for virtue. In this moral economy, even reflection looks like weakness. Resultism is efficient, yes, but only the way a virus is efficient. It consumes trust faster than it creates it. It tells us that morality is secondary, that the scoreboard is absolute. And when society internalizes that message, something inside us shifts. We start valuing people for what they produce, not who they become. You can see the fatigue on faces across industries. Teachers told to improve performance metrics. Journalists pressured to chase clicks over truth. Scientists evaluated by citation counts more than discoveries. Every field has its scoreboard, and every scoreboard narrows the soul. But here's the cruel irony. The more we chase results, the fewer we truly believe in. Because when everything becomes a performance, even success feels staged. We begin to suspect that everyone's faking it, including ourselves. We scroll past achievements and feel envy without admiration, desire without trust. It's not cynicism, it's exhaustion. Resultism doesn't just corrupt individuals, it rewires culture. It turns every pursuit into a zero-sum race, every collaboration into competition. It rewards the illusion of mastery over the reality of learning. It trains us to optimize before we understand, to produce before we reflect. And perhaps worst of all, it teaches the next generation that how you win doesn't matter, as long as you win. But games built on that logic don't last. When the only goal is victory, rules start to feel unnecessary. When the rule breakers win, the honest players quit. And when enough players walk away, the game collapses, not with an explosion, but with silence. This is where we are now. living in a society that prizes achievement yet no longer trusts achievers, a world drowning in results but starving for meaning. In the next act, we'll face the consequence head-on. What happens when the pursuit of victory kills the very spirit of play itself? When fairness dies and we begin to wonder why we ever played at all? Every game depends on one fragile belief, that the rules matter. Without that belief, even victory loses meaning. And yet, somewhere between our obsession with outcomes and our tolerance for shortcuts, that belief began to fade. This is how fair play dies, not with outrage, but with quiet resignation. We didn't notice it at first. When the first few rule benders won, we told ourselves they were exceptions. A company that inflated its numbers, an influencer who bought followers, a politician who twisted the truth just enough to win an election. We said, they'll get caught eventually, but eventually never came. They didn't get punished, they got promoted. They became the new standard. Once cheating pays, the cost of honesty rises. Those who try to play fair must work twice as hard for half the recognition. In that kind of world, fairness becomes a disadvantage. The honest grow tired, the cynical grow efficient, and the system, still obsessed with results, can't tell the difference. You can feel it in every corner of public life. In business, fake it till you make it became less of a motto and more of a business plan. In media, outrage became strategy. In academia, quantity replaced curiosity. Publish more, cite more, win the funding race. Even in art, authenticity gave way to algorithms. The race never stops. The rules keep bending to fit the winners. This is what the philosopher Hannah Arendt once warned about. When lying becomes normalized, truth becomes irrelevant. Once the act of cheating no longer feels like betrayal, the concept of integrity itself dissolves. We stop asking, is this right? We start asking, will this work? But as the rule breakers thrive, something else begins to happen. The silent exodus of the honest. People withdraw, not because they can't compete, but because they no longer believe the game is worth playing. Teachers stop innovating because metrics overshadow meaning. Journalists stop digging because clicks decide truth. Citizens stop voting because corruption feels inevitable. When trust erodes, participation follows. And without participation, no game survives. In a fair game, effort fuels hope. In a broken one, effort fuels cynicism. You start asking, why bother? That's how societies decay, not through chaos, but through apathy. When fairness dies, it doesn't explode. It fades into indifference. Resultism was supposed to make us more efficient, but it made us less human. We learned to measure everything except sincerity. We optimized for visibility and forgot how to see each other. In the process, we lost the emotional infrastructure of fairness: trust, patience, empathy, gratitude. These were not luxuries. They were the invisible scaffolding that kept the game upright. And now, you can feel the emptiness spreading. The applause still sounds, but it's hollow. The scoreboard still lights up, but no one's watching. We are winning more and believing less. Every scandal, every exposed fraud, every hollow success chips away at the illusion that merit still matters. The death of fair play isn't a sudden collapse. It's a quiet corrosion of meaning. It's the moment when good people stop caring, when rules become decoration, when excellence turns performative, and when morality becomes marketing. But maybe the real tragedy isn't that fairness died. It's that we kept pretending it was still alive. We kept teaching our children to do the right thing, even as the world rewarded those who didn't. We told them to believe in rules we no longer enforced. And in doing so, we passed down not a legacy of fairness, but a vocabulary of hypocrisy. If society is a game, then fairness is its gravity. Invisible, constant, holding everything together. When gravity disappears, things don't just fall, they drift. That's what we see now. Institutions drifting, values drifting, people drifting from one metric to another, hoping to land somewhere that still feels real. The question now isn't who's winning, it's why play at all. In the next act, we'll search for an answer. Because if resultism killed fairness, perhaps fairness can be reborn, not as nostalgia, but as a new ethic. An ethic that values not just the score, but the way we play. If resultism hollowed out the meaning of success, then the only way forward is to restore meaning where it was lost, in the process itself. Because the truth is, how we do something has always mattered more than what we achieve. We just forgot to measure it. Every society at its best has had some moral compass beyond performance. Ancient artisans signed their work not for fame, but for accountability. Scientists once chased understanding, not citations. Teachers once saw their purpose in shaping minds, not test scores. Somewhere along the way, these quiet intentions were replaced by visible rewards. The compass was traded for a stopwatch. But what if the process is not the means to an end? What if it is the end? What if the real success lies in the integrity of the journey, not the height of the outcome? To believe this requires a cultural shift. It means seeing value not only in the product, but in the patience that created it. It means praising those who build slowly, who choose honesty over efficiency, who refuse to win by breaking the rules. In a world obsessed with acceleration, integrity is an act of rebellion. We need to redefine merit as something deeper than results, something closer to resilience with ethics intact. Because effort without ethics is manipulation, and success without integrity is fraud. The new question isn't what did you achieve, but what did it cost you to achieve it? Did you create value or just extract it? Did your victory make the game better or smaller? There are examples of this ethic emerging quietly around us. Some companies now reject growth at all costs, choosing sustainability over scale. Some creators refuse to chase virality, choosing substance over spectacle. Even in education, new models are emerging: contextual admissions, opportunity indexes, attempts to judge not just what a student accomplished, but what they overcame to accomplish it. These are small shifts, but revolutionary ones. They remind us that fairness begins not at the finish line, but at the starting conditions. The ethics of process is not about moral perfection. It's about moral direction. It's about aligning effort with empathy, competition with conscience. It's about rediscovering dignity in the unseen labor, the uncelebrated struggle, the quiet persistence that doesn't trend. We cannot all control our results. Luck, timing, privilege, they shape more than we admit. But we can control the process, the choices we make, the honesty we keep, the respect we show for the game itself. That's what defines us when the scoreboard fades. Imagine a world that rewards the how, where business leaders are admired not for profits, but for how those profits were earned. Where public figures are respected not for popularity, but for the integrity of their words. Where students are valued not just for their grades, but for their perseverance through constraint. It sounds idealistic, maybe even naive, but isn't that the point? Every moral renaissance begins with a little naivety. We don't need to end competition, we need to ennoble it. Fair play shouldn't be a nostalgic virtue, it should be a living principle. A fair society doesn't eliminate ambition, it civilizes it. It reminds us that the purpose of playing isn't to win against others, but to win with our humanity intact. And yes, it will be slower. Integrity always is. Honesty doesn't scale as fast as deception. But a society that measures speed over soul eventually burns out. Not just economically, but spiritually. We've already seen the cost of that burnout: anxiety, disillusionment, distrust. If we want to rebuild belief, we must slow down enough to see one another again. So perhaps the new definition of merit is this: to succeed without betraying the conditions that make success meaningful. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because when results alone define value, we end up with impressive ruins. But when process defines value, we begin to build something enduring, a game worth playing again. In the next act, we'll look beyond critique and vision, toward renewal. What would a society built on fair play, honesty, and slow merit actually look like? How do we write new rules that people want to follow? Not because they must, but because they trust them. Because the real game isn't over. It's waiting for new players and new rules. When a game collapses, there are two kinds of players left: those who mourn what was lost and those who begin to build again. We've spent too long mourning. We've watched fairness fade, trust corrode, and effort lose its meaning. But grief, if we listen to it carefully, carries a question inside it. What can we rebuild from the ruins? The death of fair play was never the end. It was a warning that results alone cannot sustain belief, that numbers cannot nourish purpose, and so the work before us is not to resurrect the old game, but to imagine a new one, a society that prizes how we play as much as what we win. What would that look like? It would begin with education, because that's where every game starts. A system that measures not just grades, but context. That asks, what barriers did this student overcome? What resources did they lack? And how did they adapt? Imagine an application essay that rewards care, resilience, and curiosity as much as polished achievement, where working a night job is seen as initiative, not a distraction, where potential means courage, not privilege. It would continue into work and business, where leaders are valued not for quarterly returns, but for how they treat the people who generate them, where transparency is not a buzzword, but a practice, where growth is measured in trust, not just in revenue. In this world, ethics isn't a department, it's the foundation. And it would extend to culture, the great amplifier of values. Social platforms could reward integrity by design, less virality, more verification. We could design algorithms that prioritize depth over outrage, sincerity over noise. We could teach young creators that attention is not the same as admiration, and that the worth of a voice lies not in its volume, but in its truth. These may sound idealistic, but every fair system began as an ideal. Fair play itself was once a radical thought. It said, the strongest doesn't always deserve to win. It asked, what if we compete, but with respect? And from that question, entire civilizations of art, science, and democracy were born. So maybe the next civilization begins here, with a similar act of imagination, not to end competition, but to humanize it again. Not to reject success, but to restore its soul. The rules of this new game would be simple. Play honestly. Let truth be strategy, not casualty. Play patiently. Let time be an ally, not an enemy. Play together. Let collaboration, not conquest, define greatness. If that sounds naive, remember, cynicism has built nothing. The modern world was built by those foolish enough to believe in fairness. And belief, even fragile, is contagious. Because every time someone chooses honesty over convenience, every time a teacher praises effort over results, every time a company values integrity over speed, the new game expands. Fairness, like trust, grows by participation. Perhaps the real revolution isn't political or technological. Perhaps it's moral, a slow, stubborn reclaiming of the idea that effort still matters, that playing fair is still worth it, that process is still sacred. In this future, success won't disappear. It will deepen. Winning will no longer mean standing above others, but standing with them. And achievement will no longer be a number, but a narrative. One that includes how you fought, how you learned, and who you helped along the way. We can't bring back the old faith in meritocracy. It was too simple for the complexity of our world. But we can build a wiser faith, one that admits the role of luck and privilege, yet still believes in human agency, in the dignity of honest effort. A faith that says, you may not control the outcome, but you can control your conduct. The game is not over. It's just waiting for players who remember why we played in the first place. Not for applause, not for power, not even for victory, but for the joy of testing ourselves against something difficult, for the quiet pride of knowing we played clean, for the simple grace of fairness itself. That's the new game. And maybe, just maybe, it's the only one still worth playing.